Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this breakout session, Professional Learning and the FAST Experience. We're going to get started momentarily. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to today's presentation on professional learning and the FAST experience. I'd like to turn things over to Mike Garet to begin. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Garet, Vice President at AIR, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. I'm looking forward to a really exciting conversation. As folks said in the plenary session, time is a precious resource, and it's definitely a precious resource during our 45 minutes here, so I want to use the time very efficiently in our discussion. I'll now turn to Toni Smith, a principal researcher at AIR. Toni and I co-lead the FAST study, and we'll co-moderate the session.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So we can go ahead and move the slides to the next, and then one more. Great. So I'm just going to quickly go over a couple logistics before we get started. First, as in the opening session, you all have had your microphones muted for right now, and it will be throughout the session. But if you do have questions, there's a questions box in your GoToMeeting panel or GoToWebinar panel where you can type your questions, and then I'll keep monitoring those questions and then pose some of the questions throughout the session. And also, as was the case for the opening session, we've got closed captioning that you can find at that link there, and the link is also in the chat box. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you. Well, now I'd like to learn a bit more about who is attending. To do that, we will launch a poll. So if the poll could be put up, I'd like each of you who is participating to click on your role, and I'll give you a few seconds to respond. So I'll give you just a few more seconds to click. Okay, well, thank you. We'll now close the poll. And I'd like to share the results. Oh, this is very exciting. We have quite a distribution: teachers, coaches, district and school administrators, PD providers, and researchers. So I'm really looking forward to having an excellent conversation in which we get all of these perspectives. So now I'd like to turn to the next slide and introduce our panelists. First, Robert Berretta, who's the principal of Ziegler Elementary School in Philadelphia. And why don't the panelists, why don't you turn on your cameras, and I'm going to turn off my camera. So Robert Berretta, principal of Ziegler Elementary School in Philadelphia, which was a school that participated in the FAST study. Kelli Koch, an instructional coach at the Fairfield Elementary School in Pickerington, Ohio, which is one of our partner states. Louise Marine, who is an instructional coach in the FAST program, focusing on math. Louisa was a middle school math teacher and is now director of instructional technology and online learning for a community college. Chrystalla Mouza, who is distinguished professor of teacher education and director of the School of Education at the University of Delaware. Jennifer Quinn, who was an instructional coach in the FAST program focusing on English language arts, and she's a former teacher, and Sarah Woulfin, who's an associate professor in the Department of Education and Leadership at the NEAG School of Education at the University of Connecticut. Well, let's get started with a question for our panelists. I'm going to pose the first question to Robert and Louisa. The FAST program focused on improving teachers' understanding of their state standards and aligning their instruction to the standards. In particular, what challenges do you think teachers face in aligning their instruction with standards? What knowledge, skills, or resources do you think teachers need in order to overcome these challenges? So,
cut out there for a second, Mike, but happy to jump in here. So first, thanks, Mike and Toni, for having me here. I mean, I think teachers face tons of challenges in trying to align their instruction to the standards. They have the hardest job in the world. I think like one of the challenges is certainly principals and central office folks not providing teachers with the right resources. There's certainly a lot of bad curriculum out there with really amazing marketing. But I honestly think that the biggest obstacle is the standards themselves. Like they are incredibly vague in my opinion. And, you know, we've been implementing them for 10 years. And I think I've spent 10 years unpacking, unwrapping, and breaking down standards. I think I have unpacked enough standards to fill a warehouse of suitcases. And it really, it reminds me of like the, sort of the technical challenge on the Great British Baking Show. If you've ever watched the Great British Baking Show, they have the technical challenge where like they give their bakers this very sort of vague recipe and they're like, here, make this recipe. And then the bakers are like, but we don't really know what it is. And they're like, that's part of the challenge. And, you know, like a couple of the bakers produce, you know, display quality pastries, but you get a lot of sort of inedible baked goods as a result. And, you know, I think unfortunately we've set teachers up to produce a lot of inedible baked goods, unfortunately.
And to build on that, I think with elementary school teachers, they're required to teach multiple subjects. So as a former middle school teacher, I only taught math and I taught it to different grade levels, but that gave me the opportunity to learn more about my standards, do more with them year after year, where elementary school teachers were saying, teach math, teach science, teach reading, teach language arts, teach all of these subjects and master all of these standards. So on top of the fact that there's so much packed into one standard, they have to learn and master and break down multiple different subject areas of standards as well. So I think that is part of the problem. And for math specifically, one standard can cover 4 or 5 different solution strategies or different topics, and we're trying to wrap that all into one. So it's easy for teachers to miss pieces or not understand, you know, what exactly this piece means, as Robert said before, because they're written in a way they're supposed to be vague, but they're trying to be specific, and it's open to interpretation, so everyone interprets it differently.
Are there other panelists who would like to talk about pastries or multiple subjects?
I'd love to just echo the sentiments of so many people today, and that building on what Robert and Louisa said, time is just so precious to teachers. So I've found as a teacher and the teachers I've worked with, everyone to be just incredibly willing to do that hard work to unpack standards and dig into them. And the time to do that is certainly something to consider.
Toni, are there questions from the attendees? I want to encourage attendees to pose questions for or comments for our discussion in the chat box. And
so far, we don't have any questions, but folks, please go ahead and send them along. Put them in the questions box.
So I wondered if panelists, if you have seen good examples of well-aligned instruction, and if so, what made that possible?
I'll jump in on this one. So I think like one thing that's to sort of Louisa's point about teachers having to sort of, especially elementary teachers having to teach a boatload of standards. One of the things that's really been helpful at Ziegler, where I work, is, starting in second grade, we've helped teachers sort of, become subject specific so that they can, over years, develop expertise in just like sort of a small set of standards, right? So, I mean, I think I was like crunching some numbers earlier, and there's like 50 standards in ELA alone, if you look at the core standards, and each one of those needs to be broken down into many other different sort of, recipes that you would then bake in order to continue my pastry analogy here. So that has been really helpful, because over time, teachers become sort of experts in knowing those standards really well. I think the other thing that I've seen help teachers a lot is when they can see exemplars. And I'm just going to double down on the Great British Baking Show and say, like, at the start of each of those segments, they show the viewers, like, this is the pastry that everybody's going to try to make here today, with those little sort of cartoony drawings, and they show you how it's going to be made. So you already have this like sort of exemplar pastry in mind. And then, the bakers can bake towards that. And I think, when there are really great exemplars of the standards and where we expect students to go, that has been really beneficial for teachers, because now they sort of have this vision in mind, and they can then, create the path there.
And going back to time, I think teachers can be more successful, or almost create more time, if they have the opportunity to form a learning community. So some of the schools that I worked in, or that I worked with, they had a group of fourth grade math teachers that spent time together planning things. So they all did, common lesson plans and common tests, and then they were able to spend more time planning out the activities, unpacking the standards, and really looking at the alignment, versus where there's one fourth grade teacher in this school by herself, and she saw another fourth grade teacher a year ago at the fall welcome back district meeting that might have happened. So I think allowing opportunities for teacher collaboration across grade level, especially in grade level, same subject, is really important, and really gives teachers the opportunities to better the alignment.
Robert, yes.
I just wanted to do a quick ad that sort of brings together Robert's and Louisa's point that both principals and instructional coaches can play a role in sort of helping to do that alignment and to ensure that that collaboration time is matched to standards, and also to do some of that work to sort of highlight what some of the exemplars are within a building, or even when a coach sort of models exemplary practices.
That's a great point, Sarah, just to build a little bit on that. And I really do appreciate the practitioner's perspective. In my previous life, I was an elementary school teacher as well. So I would say completely agree with some of the challenges that you have identified in terms of time, but also really having to deal with multiple subjects, for example, that makes it even more complicated. But I would kind of flip that a little bit around and say that also presents a nice opportunity as teachers think about ways in which they can actually attack the standards from multiple angles. So I do a lot of work with computer science and computing and NGSS, and one of the standards has to do with computational thinking, which comes from both math and science, and you can address it in social studies. So just building those cross-curricular connections, I think, it's one of the strengths, so to speak, of the elementary school teachers. The only other thing I would like to add is that it's important to have the alignment at the grade level, but it's also important to have that vertical type of alignment. So just making sure that teachers continue to build, on what has been covered, and knowing, what comes next, and what kind of prior knowledge the students bring in. So thank you.
Well, speaking of what comes next, I'd like to thank you for this excellent foundation for our discussion, and move to Toni, who is going to talk a bit about the approach to alignment that we are using in the FAST study, and then we'll, after, discuss how that fits with the views you've just laid out. So I'll turn it to Toni, and if the panelists could all turn off your webcams temporarily while Toni is speaking, and then we'll come back on. And next slide.
Thanks, Mike. And I do want to note that we did get a question during that time, which is exciting. So we will make sure to return to that after in the next segment. So it was, to give you a preview, it was a question about tiered support for teachers. If I understand the question correctly, it was about, we know that we use tiered support at times for students or just learning in general, and what do we think about that use for teachers? So I'll let you think on that as I go through this next little bit. So what I'm going to share is a little bit more detail on those tools to support reflection that we used in the instructional coaching as part of the FAST program than I did in the opening session. And those were the instructional logs and the video recordings of teachers' lessons. And just as a reminder, again, these are described in more detail in our conference handout. I have a picture there of the page that starts the FAST study within that handout. And that handout is also in your GoToWebinar control panel. So I'll go ahead and start with the logs. So next slide. For our study and for the FAST program, the logs were housed within an online portal that we developed as part of the study, and each teacher had their own account to that portal. When they went in to complete a log, they were asked to report on the instruction that they gave or implemented over a given time period. It was usually a month or maybe a little bit longer than a month. And when they went into the log, it looked very much like that survey enacted curriculum that I described in the opening session. They saw a list of topics in math or ELA, whichever they were focused on, and they were asked to give the level of emphasis that they gave to those topics at various levels of cognitive demand over the course of the log period. And then when they were finished with all of that, they got a report in their account that showed the alignment of their instruction to their state standards. And that report looks like what's on the next slide. So we can go ahead and shift slides. We call it a color map. And this is the picture that's also in your handout. So if you want to follow along or it's hard to see, you can look in your handout and see the numbers. So there's a lot going on here. So let me sort of explain it. At a high level, what you're seeing here is a picture of the teacher's reported instruction on the left and a picture of the standards on the right. So now as we dig in closer and look at what's really going on, you see in the middle column something called topic categories. And this is a math color map, so we see some math categories listed there in the middle column. And incidentally, if you click on those categories, you get an identical map, or you get another map where the categories aren't the middle column, but the topics are, those fine grade topics. But for right now, we'll just stay at the category level. Then if you look on both sides of that column, that middle column, you see the cognitive demands for math going across in both sides, on the instruction side and on the target or standard side. Within each of the cells, you see a number, and those numbers are percentages. So if we start by looking at the leftmost upper cell under instruction, the 4.98, that represents, or what that's saying is that the teacher reported focusing approximately 5% of her instruction on the number and concepts category at the recall perform procedures level. And then if we look on the other side at the same location, we see a 3.2. And what that's saying is 3.2% of the content in the standards focuses on number concepts at the recall perform procedures level. The color of the cell represents how much emphasis is the teacher placed on it or the standards have on it. The darker the cell means more emphasis. And so then stepping back out, what teachers were looking to do was to try to make their instruction picture on the left look like the right in terms of the pattern of colors. And if we look at this one right now, they don't look identical. In fact, for example, if you look at fraction operations, you see colors on the right, but not on the left. And what's going on here is that the teacher hasn't yet covered fraction operations in her curriculum. So this may be an early log that she had completed. And so over time, that will fill in. She'll probably cover fraction operations during the year. And as she does more logs, that will fill in. So the logs continue to accumulate over time. And that left-hand side keeps updating as teachers complete more logs. The right-hand side stays static because those are the standards. And then what happens in the individual coaching sessions, and Louisa and Jennifer both have experience with this, is that the coach talks to the teacher about where we see things matching up or where we see gaps. And then talks a little bit more about why those gaps might be there. Is it because we haven't yet covered those in instruction? Or is it because you did cover it, but you sort of missed a piece, and maybe we'll figure out a way to go back and cover it again? So that's one part of what happens in the coaching sessions and one tool that they use. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit of information on the video recordings of the lessons that are also part of those coaching sessions. So for this activity, teachers record a lesson in their classroom, and the video gets uploaded to their account in that same online portal. They also provide a little bit of information about that lesson, like the standard that they're going to teach, that they were focused on, and they also complete one of those logs, but just for that lesson. The coach then is the same coach that works with the teacher throughout the year, and the coach has access to the teacher's account, can go in and watch the video, can see the information that the teacher provided, and then identifies a couple short video clips from the teacher's video that they can use to talk about strengths and areas for growth in improving their alignment to state standards. And we usually pick about 2, maybe 3 clips, about 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes a piece. And so then during the coaching session, in addition to discussing the color map, the coach and the teacher watch the video clip and then discuss it together. At the end of the coaching session, they put all the pieces together and discuss next steps for upcoming instruction. So that gives you a little bit more of a sense of what those tools look like and how those coaching sessions move forward in the FAST program. So I'm going to go ahead. I think we had thought about a second poll, but I think we'll maybe should just go ahead and keep on with the conversation with the panelists. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, who we'll talk about some of these tools with the panelists. And then just a reminder that we do have a question here that everybody's been thinking about that we want to get back to.
Thank you for that excellent discussion of how the FAST intervention worked. I'd now like the panelists to turn their cameras back on. And I'm going to ask Chrystalla and Jennifer to talk a bit about tools that you have used or seen discussed, and the FAST tools in particular. Do you think tools of this kind would be helpful in supporting alignment? What kinds of tools would be helpful in supporting alignment? So Chrystalla, why don't you leap in first?
Sure, yes. So I would say definitely, the tools. I'm actually very impressed with the instructional log and the opportunity for teachers to get that type of immediate feedback. I think it's very important for them to be able to kind of tell where they stand, at each time. So most definitely, I believe they could be very useful. There's also, as you know, a rich body of literature that makes it clear that use of video and coaching, more broadly can also be very effective in supporting reflection on practice. So the use of video can really help the teachers learn how to notice and assess their own practice with the support of the virtual coach. I would say that's also even more so beneficial for novice teachers as they begin to implement changes in their practice and using the video as an anchoring, sort of tool to hold conversations and reflections with the coach. One area where perhaps might merit a little bit of additional work is the selection of video clips. So if I understand correctly, in the FAST study, the coach selects the video clip and then anchors a conversation with the teacher. So there's some work that indicates that actually the selection of the clip itself, like the moment in time, it actually could sort of like support that teacher learning and growth and how teachers, choose which segments they want to focus on. It's also based on their ability to select excerpts from their practice that indicate, their understanding of the materials. So perhaps one area where, might merit a little bit more study, is what happens when the teachers select the clip where they want to discuss and how their selections might evolve over time. So I'm going to stop here and let Jennifer respond, and then I could add a few more things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Chrystalla, I had the same idea. I think that both of these tools and my experience in using them, both video and the instructional logs, really were useful in that they promoted reflective conversations and they promoted teacher reflection. So what I found was that, like you said, teachers would watch the video and yes, we were selecting clips for this study. But a lot of times teachers had their own ideas, just from watching their own videos, and teachers were very reflective on their own. So I think with the video, like you said, it helps everybody be in a shared place to discuss the implementation of the plans in the classroom, not just the intention, but the implementation of them. And then, it gets everybody really focused. So choosing those short clips helped keep the focus on alignment and the focus on alignment to instruction, to the standards, I'm sorry. But I think that is interesting, that teachers would be able to select clips and keep it focused on alignment to the standards. The instructional logs, I just wanted to add, were also really helpful in having discussion, not just about the not just about the topic content of the standards, but helping teachers to really think about and pay attention to the cognitive demands that the standards required. So as we were digging into one particular standard at a time, that log was really helpful as a visual, and also in just getting everybody thinking, we're talking about characters, at what level of cognitive demand is the standard calling for that? And paying attention to that in instruction. It really helped with reflection.
So I want to jump in for a second and return to the question that Amy Carroll in the audience asked. Oh, wait, it's a different, the question it maybe isn't Amy Carroll. It was an earlier question. Oh, yes, tiered. So the question about, what I think the question here is about is different teachers may have different needs, and how do we address teachers who are at a different level of alignment? And do the tools that we're talking about do that, or do they assume every teacher is in the same place? And I'll open that up to the panel. What do you think?
I've been considering that question as our discussion, and I have a different perspective because I wasn't part of the FAST program, but I'm an instructional coach in Ohio, and listening to those tools, I would love to get my hands on them to work with teachers with. I mean, they seem invaluable and would really push teachers forward. We try to do a lot of videoing, but the tool to have with the chart and charting the data would be amazing. But I also thought about, in terms of tiering, sometimes it's hard as an instructional coach, and I'm lucky to have just one building. Many coaches are torn between a district, so the coach and the principal can't be seen as the only leaders in the building, and we have to kind of invest in our other teachers and see them as experts and realize their expertise in other ways. So, maybe more intense training comes from the coach, but as we move along and with sustained efforts, invest in other teacher leaders also to kind of provide that tiered level of support.
So Toni and I have talked about this a fair amount, and within FAST, any tiering was implicit. I mean, the coach with the teacher individually on the fly thought about what was appropriate, but it wasn't built in explicitly as it would be for tiered instruction for students in the classroom. And I wonder if any of you have ideas about more explicit identifying teachers. Maybe a teacher has never seen the pie, as Robert said, and so that teacher needs to see the pie. Another one, like me, I've seen the pie, but I can't make it. So that's different.
In certain systems that I've studied, where I've studied their coaching approaches, principals have explicitly sort of met with coaches to help identify sort of focal sets of teachers to work with at different points in the year. And so that's sort of one sort of system or routine that could then enable the coaches to focus more on certain teachers than others. At the same time, sometimes that can contribute to a certain tension where educators will feel, oh, if I'm in trouble if I'm the one being coached. And so again, it takes really sort of skillful work on behalf of, I would argue, both the principal and sort of district leaders to set up sort of this is, how and why coaching is going to benefit everyone and how and why different folks may get tiered support at different points.
To your point, Mike, I also did think that the instructional logs, in a way, were used to differentiate, the type of coaching that teachers receive. So in a way, the differentiation was embedded in the log. So if the coach is seeing that certain aspects or certain practices or standards don't show up, then they use that as a cue to focus the discussion on that. Where I thought your point as to kind of seeing the pie might be helpful is that cognitive demand. I guess maybe that's a point where Toni can speak a little bit more about it, but whether teachers understand what's a cognitively demanding task, in math, in LA, and then, the variations of it, so to speak.
Yes. Well, let me transition to one final set of questions here, which I think link to just what we were talking about. As Toni described in the plenary session, the preliminary results we have indicate that the FAST intervention had a pretty large effect on teachers' alignment in math, a somewhat smaller effect, but still a noticeable but not significant effect in English language arts. And at least in the first year, no impact on achievement. And we haven't analyzed the second year achievement results yet because it took a long time to get the achievement scores. So why did things come out this way? What does it take to get an impact on achievement, which is, of course, the whole point? And I'd like to ask Kelli to respond first, and then Sarah, and then we'll open it up.
I was considering this, and I was looking back at Linda Darling-Hammond's work on effective PD, and I was looking at the FAST program and reflecting on that, and I could check off each box. This PD went through, you couldn't, exactly what she's talking about in her 7 effective strategies for professional development. One thing I noticed was one of the last ones was sustained duration over time. And I think more time devoted, and continuing with those teachers and developing them more, I think would make an impact. And another issue was some of the teachers struggled with having so many initiatives. And I find that in our school district as well. There's so many things that they're having to learn new every year. I always hear, can't we just have one thing new this year? And so I could see that having an effect, possibly too. They couldn't really just focus on what they needed to do. And I also was wondering, I wasn't part of the study, obviously, I don't know how it was coached, but student involvement with the standards, and getting them involved in what invested and what they know. We've been doing a lot of work with John Hattie's high yield strategies, and so we've tried to focus on teacher clarity. So it starts with deep understanding of the standards, but then we have to get the kids to know what are they learning, why are they learning it, and how will they. So kind of building up student investment in the standards also, I think, would also have an impact on their achievement. But that's from my outside looking in, because I wasn't part of it, but that was what I was considering as I was looking at this question.
Thank you. Sarah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to continue with the time theme and continuing with the baking theme. We sometimes have bakers who run out of time on the baking show. But on a more serious point with the time factor, and correct if any of this is sort of incorrect, but the data was collected on 4th and 5th graders, and the intervention was focused on 4th and 5th grade teachers. And something that I tend to think about is, if that's the case, what was happening 3 years prior? So the intervention did not sort of address what was the nature of ELA and math instruction, and particularly when we think of sort of foundational early literacy skills, kind of the criticality of kindergarten and 1st grade reading instruction. And so I sort of have the wondering of, again, sort of, I think Chrystalla mentioned sort of the importance of this vertical alignment. So if we want to move the needle at 4th and 5th grade, there are really important moves that need to happen, within kindergarten and 1st grade to sort of see gains down the road. And so again, I think this fits into this extended duration need for professional learning, and also for this kind of consistent goal and focus for the whole school. So if the whole school is focused on this sort of aligned instruction and cognitively demanding sorts of pedagogy, then that doesn't just begin in 4th grade. I'm not trying to just the FAST study, but just sort of throwing it out there, that doesn't begin in 4th grade, but it begins much earlier, and then we see those results by 4th and 5th grade.
Other panelists, would you like to weigh in on time or the pie or the grade levels or other things?
I can share a little bit about the vertical alignment piece. Having been a middle school teacher at 6th and 8th grade level, we could kind of trace back to where certain topics might have fallen off in elementary school, or the standards changed this year, so this wasn't covered, so now we have to cover it. In addition to, in coaching a lot of the 4th grade teachers, they could tell you the same thing. Well, 2 years ago, we switched from this curriculum to this curriculum, so we don't really know what happened. And we heard that this teacher never taught that, so now we have to make sure we teach it at the 2nd and 3rd grade level, so then we can get it to the 4th grade level, so they can be ready for 5th grade. So there is a lot of alignment work that needs to be done, and it's not always a friendly conversation because teachers are so used to being attacked, for lack of a better word, for not covering what they're supposed to or not teaching what they're supposed to, that it's hard to have those conversations, but they're necessary.
Louisa, that also, it feels like this COVID closure and the return to school is going to bring up a whole host of issues related to sort of coverage and the questions. And I really appreciate how you laid out these different ways of, and these different kind of permutations of these conversations about coverage and challenges with that.
One other thing I'd like to make is this idea of dosage that was brought up again, in the opening panel. And I think that's important. It goes to Kelly's point that, the professional development did include all the right elements or the right ingredients, if we want to keep that cooking recipe moving. But I think how much of it you get. And it did seem that perhaps, the dosage was a little bit on the low side. And I think that comes back to this idea of buy-in. So Kelly spoke about student buy-in of the standards, but I think that teacher buy-in, it's also very important. And, addressing these ideas of prior beliefs, I've seen that in my own work as well. They have the standards, but if they don't feel that they're appropriate for their students or the context where they work in, it's not conducive to the implementation of certain standards, then they're less likely to be invested in them. So I think those two elements could also be considered, as to why we're seeing the outcomes that we see in terms of standardized assessments.
And so, as Toni had explained, there were 5 cycles per year, but actually for teachers who participated, there were only about 5 cycles total, not 5 per year, so half. And part of it was difficult to find the time, even for teachers who would buy in, which gets at how you structure the day. But speaking of finding time, I want to turn things to Toni to see if there are more questions from our attendees.
There was what I thought was going to be a question, but then Sarah, you ended up answering it. So she said.
Well, so I hope that the audience will send Toni some questions. I have a couple more related to what you've just been talking about. One is the student perspective. One potential critique I think one could have of the FAST intervention is it focused on teachers' knowledge and teacher moves, but it didn't look explicitly at the students' work except indirectly as it's reflected in the videos. And so, and this is something that you had raised just now in the conversation, and I wonder how could one bring the student into the PD? After all, it's the student who we care about. I mean, it's not that we don't care about the teachers, but ultimately it's the student. So I'm wondering if you have ideas about how to bring the students into the PD more.
Well, maybe instructional products might be a proxy to bringing the students in. So for example, as the coach and the teacher review the video clips, if the teachers are asked to bring some of the student materials with them, I think I might actually foreground the discussion more explicitly on student outcomes. So, that's just something to consider. I would say, that especially during the reflection, we do know that reflection is hard for teachers, and oftentimes if it's not scaffolded in specific ways and with explicit prompts, it tends to be a lot more descriptive and less analytical. So I think the use of student products might actually prompt a little bit further, into their own analytical understanding of how that work might represent certain standards.
And just to piggyback on that, I know we do instructional rounds in our building, and a lot of times when we go into the rooms, we're looking at what the students are doing, and all of our notes are on what the students are doing. We're not even really looking at what the teacher is doing to try and make it less judgmental also. But I'm wondering if that could be part of it too. Like as you're watching the video, simply watch it almost video the students and their reactions and what they're doing and the work they're producing might be another way to look at it.
We did do that. I had some schools that ran math workshops, so the instruction was very short on the teacher part, and so we got to observe a lot of student work and student interaction, and it was really helpful because you could see the students that were missing a piece, and so you could work with the teacher on how to get those students where they needed to be. You could see the students that were where they should be or above, and you could kind of, encourage the teacher to employ them as a student leader in the classroom, especially since they do a lot of good work. And it also helped kind of show where the holes were, where the teacher might have been missing a piece. That came up a lot in division. Because we were all taught long division, and so Common Core division can be hard to wrap your head around. And so we had some teachers, they're like, I just don't understand, these students don't get it, they can't do long division. And when we would look at the work that the students had done, the standard algorithm was the only part of the standard that had been addressed. So when we were able to back up and teach the teacher partial quotients and these other strategies, we saw it the next time and the students were able to pick it up. And when we met again, they were like, oh, they understand it now. So that student piece is extremely important and helpful.
Yeah, I would say,
Toni, I just wanted to see if there are any questions have emerged from the audience.
I think there are a few coming in.
Oh, good.
As we're talking.
Okay. So,
I want to give Jennifer, though, a chance to just comment on that as I look at what the questions are. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Good. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I was just building on what Louisa was saying is that often the clips that we would choose and talk about with teachers were centered around what the students were actually doing. And I think that really helped the teachers as well, because when you're in the moment teaching, you might see things totally differently than when you go back and watch that same group where you were there, just listening to the students hold a discussion or talk about what they were learning. I think that teachers really benefited from seeing the student perspective in their videos as well.
So one of the comments, and I think that I'm going to get this right, was actually talking a bit. So this idea about students, focusing the coaching on students. In the FAST program, the coaches were remote, which is different than, I think, Kelly, it sounds like your experience. You go into the room and you can witness everything that's happening in the room. And we were getting what we could see, the FAST coaches were getting what they could see in the video. And so you could argue, well, maybe put the video on the students. But it does bring up a bigger question about, as we shift potentially into more of a virtual setting, how does coaching work in those settings, particularly if we want to pay attention to the students? So is it a difference between a virtual coach versus an in-person coach? Is it a difference between the platform? Is it a difference between where you focus a camera? I think that might be some of the question there.
Mm-hmm.
I see we've reached 1:14, which is the time when we're supposed to turn back to the host. And I really, this has been an outstanding discussion, and I have many more questions and no time to to ask them. I want to thank the panel, and this question about how to look at student work in a remote setting, I think, is really a crucial one, and especially in today's environment. So thank you all. You can contact us by email if you would like to talk about FAST or these issues further. And with that, I'll turn things to Toni, who has a few last comments.
Okay, great. Let me just pop back on.
And last slide.
See who's talking. So yes, the last slide. So thank you so much to our panelists and our attendees and the great questions. It was a wonderful discussion. Really excited to hear all the ideas and thoughts about these issues. As a reminder, we will be having our closing session at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, and that's going to be a conversation between Andy Porter and Linda Darling-Hammond. So make sure you hop in for that. And if you haven't already registered to get your unique link to join that, there's a URL right there on the or on the slide. And then as a reminder too, we are recording all these sessions and they will be made available at csale.org/videos. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to an interesting conversation with Linda Darling-Hammond in a few minutes.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Toni, for making the FAST intervention happen.
and all the coaches.
And all the
principals
coaches,
and the schools
absolutely.
for signing up. It was good. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.